The morning her father sold her, Mei Lin did not cry. She stood in the doorway of the only home she had ever known, holding a single cloth bag containing everything her family had decided she was worth. 2 worn dresses, a cracked hand mirror, and a folded paper bearing a stranger's name, while her father counted the coins in his palm without once looking at her face. "You are a burden this family can no longer carry," he said. She walked out the door and never looked back. If you are new here, please subscribe to our channel and follow this story all the way to the end. Then leave a comment telling me what city you are watching from, because I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let us begin. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Ethan Brooks knew it was a Tuesday because he had just finished mending the south fence line and was sitting on the top rail watching the afternoon light stretch long and golden across the Montana grassland, when Jesse, his youngest ranch hand, came riding hard from the direction of town, with a folded envelope held high in one hand like it was something important. Ethan did not move from the fence rail. He waited. He had learned a long time ago that letters either carried good news or bad news, and the speed at which a man rode toward you usually told you which kind it was before you ever broke the seal. Jesse pulled up short, his horse blowing hard, and held the envelope out with both hands, the way a man presents something he is not sure he wants to be responsible for delivering. "Came through the territory post," Jesse said. "All the way from San Francisco, boss. Marked urgent." Ethan took it. He looked at the return name written in the upper left corner in precise, controlled handwriting. Walter H. Carter, and felt nothing in particular, because the name meant nothing to him yet. He slid one finger under the wax seal, unfolded the single page inside, and read. He read it twice. Then he folded it carefully, tucked it into his shirt pocket, climbed down from the fence rail, and walked back toward the line cabin without saying a word. Jesse called after him. "Everything all right, boss?" "Ride back to the main house," Ethan said without turning around. "Tell Marcus I will be at the summer cabin through the end of the season. He knows what to do." Jesse hesitated. "You sure it is only May? Nobody stays at the line cabin through summer by choice." "I am staying by choice," Ethan said. "Go on now." He did not explain himself further because Ethan Brooks rarely explained himself to anyone. It was one of the qualities that made working for him either deeply reassuring or deeply frustrating, depending on the day and depending on the man. That evening, sitting alone in the small weathered line cabin at the far edge of his property, a cabin most of his ranch hands had never even seen, because it sat a hard 2-hour ride from the main house beyond a ridge that the summer maps did not bother labeling. Ethan read the letter a third time by the light of a single oil lamp. It was written by a man named Walter Carter, who identified himself as a San Francisco merchant of considerable standing. The letter was formal and businesslike, the kind of letter a man writes when he has decided the matter is already settled and only needs the other party's signature to make it official. Walter Carter, the letter explained, had a daughter. Her name was Mei Lin. She was 23 years old. She was, according to her father's own written words, a source of considerable difficulty and embarrassment to this family due to her excessive size, her obstinate nature, her inability to conduct herself with appropriate feminine grace, and her general failure to attract a suitable match, despite several costly and ultimately humiliating attempts on my part to arrange one. The letter went on. Walter Carter had heard through business connections he did not name that Ethan Brooks was a man of the Montana Territory who lived alone and might be persuaded to take a wife under unconventional circumstances. How was offering transportation costs, a small sum of money, and a wagon of household goods as what he called a reasonable settlement in exchange for relieving this family of an ongoing obligation. At the bottom of the page in slightly smaller handwriting, as if added almost as an afterthought, "She is not without basic domestic skills. She will not cause you trouble if managed with firmness." Ethan set the letter down on the rough wooden table. He sat for a long time looking at the lamp flame. Howe was not a man who made decisions quickly, and he was not a man who made decisions out of anger, even when anger would have been the most natural response in the world. What he felt reading that letter was not exactly anger. It was something quieter and heavier than anger, something closer to recognition. He had seen men like Walter Carter before. He had grown up watching men like Walter Carter decide what other people were worth and write it down in ink like the decision was final. He picked up a pen, found a clean piece of paper, and wrote back. His reply was 4 sentences long. He would accept the arrangement. The woman could come. He would meet the wagon at the edge of the property road. She would want for nothing. He did not sign it with his full name or mention the extent of his holdings, because Walter Carter had not asked, and Ethan saw no particular reason to offer information to a man who treated his own daughter like a debt to be settled. He sealed the envelope and left it on the table for Jesse to post in the morning. Then he went to bed. He slept soundly, which surprised him slightly, given the nature of what he had just agreed to. 3 weeks later, on a bright Wednesday morning, with the kind of blue sky that only appears over Montana in early June, Mei Lin Carter sat on the bench seat of a rented freight wagon and tried very hard not to think about where she was going. She had been traveling for 11 days. The train from San Francisco to Billings. Then a smaller rail line that smelled of cattle and coal smoke. Then 2 days of wagon travel through country that grew progressively wider and emptier and more indifferent to her existence with every mile. The driver her father had hired was a heavy-set man named Grover, who had said approximately 14 words to her since they left Billings, and 11 of those words had been directions to sit still and not bounce around, or she would tip the load. Mei Lin sat still. She had been sitting still and not causing trouble for 23 years. She was exceptionally practiced at it. She looked at the land. She had never seen anything like Montana. In San Francisco, the world was compressed buildings and streets and other people and the constant noise of a city that was always trying to prove something. Out here the world simply stopped proving anything. It spread itself flat and enormous and golden under the summer sun, and it did not care what you thought of it. She was aware that she was by any reasonable measure beautiful country. She was also aware that she was being delivered to it like furniture. The cloth bag on her lap contained 2 dresses, a hand mirror with a cracked corner, a small book of poetry her mother had given her years ago before her mother died, and $37 in coin that she had saved herself over 4 years by taking in mending work without her father's knowledge. The $37 was the only thing in the world that was entirely her own. She was thinking about the $37, specifically about whether it was enough to get her back to San Francisco, or at least to somewhere large enough to disappear into, when the wagon turned off the main road onto a narrower track, and Grover said in his 14th through 18th words to her, "This here's the property line. Somebody's supposed to meet us." Mei Lin looked up. A man was standing beside the gate. He was taller than she had expected from no expectation at all, since she had no idea what to expect. He wore a weathered brown hat and a work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows. He had the kind of face that sun and wind make over years of outdoor work. Not old exactly, but settled. Like a landscape that has decided what it is going to be. He did not walk toward the wagon. He waited for it to stop. Grover pulled the horses up short and jerked a thumb in Mei Lin's direction without ceremony. "Delivery from Carter, San Francisco. You Brooks." "I am," the man said. "Sign here." Grover produced a bill of transfer, an actual document, as if she were a shipment of goods, and held it out over the wagon side. Mei Lin watched Ethan Brooks look at the paper. She watched something move through his expression, not quite anger, not quite disgust, but something in the neighborhood of both. And then he took the pen and signed, because there was nothing to be accomplished by refusing the paperwork at this point, and because it was not the paperwork he needed to deal with. Grover handed her bag down, gave a businesslike nod, and turned the wagon around. She stood in the road. The wagon rolled away. She was alone with a stranger in a place she had never been holding. A cloth bag containing the sum total of everything her family had decided she was worth. Ethan Brooks looked at her. Not the way men had looked at her in San Francisco, not with the dismissive once-over that moved from her face to her figure and arrived at a conclusion before she had said a single word. He looked at her the way a person looks at someone they are trying to genuinely understand. "Miss Carter," he said. "Yes," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she had expected. She had been practicing being steady for so long that it had become its own kind of armor. "I am Ethan Brooks." He paused. "You have been traveling a long time." 11 days, she said. "You hungry?" She blinked. She had prepared herself for a number of possible opening conversations. This was not among them. Yes. Actually, yes. He reached over and picked up her cloth bag from the road, without asking permission, the way a person picks up something that needs carrying, rather than something they are taking ownership of, and said, "Come inside then." That was all. No speech, no terms, no inventory of what he expected from her, or what she owed him for the inconvenience of her existence. He simply picked up her bag and walked toward the cabin. She followed. She did not know what else to do. The cabin was small and honest. That was the word that came to her as she stepped through the door, honest. It was not trying to be anything, it wasn't. A single main room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a wood stove with a cast-iron skillet hanging from a hook above it, and through a narrow doorway, what appeared to be 2 separate sleeping spaces divided by a heavy curtain. The curtain was faded blue and had been mended in 3 places, which she noticed the way she always noticed things that had been mended rather than replaced. There were tools organized along one wall on a series of wooden pegs. There was a shelf with basic supplies, flour-dried beans, cornmeal salt, a small tin of coffee. There was a window facing east that let in the morning light. It was nothing like the house she had grown up in. It was also nothing like a prison, which was what she had been quietly preparing herself for. She stood just inside the doorway, while Ethan set her bag on the floor beside the curtained sleeping space and moved to the wood stove. "Beans from this morning," he said, lifting a lid on a covered pot. "And there is cornbread if you want it, not fancy." "Beans and cornbread is fine," she said. She watched him serve 2 portions at the table with complete matter-of-factness, not pausing to make any comment on the situation or her presence in it. And she realized that she was watching very carefully for the moment when he would say something. The joke, the observation, the reminder that she should be grateful, the inventory of how much she owed him already, and it did not come. He set a bowl in front of her. He sat down across from her. "You can sleep on this east side of the curtain," he said. "I will take the west. There is a bolt on your side." She looked at him. "A bolt?" "On your door," he said. "Inside. You can lock it." She had not expected that. She had not expected any of this. "All right," she said carefully. "I do not know what arrangement you were told to expect," Ethan said. He spoke the way he did everything, without hurry, without drama, like a man who had thought about what he wanted to say before he said it. "I will tell you what it actually is. You are not obligated to me for anything. You did not choose to come here. I am aware of that. You can leave whenever you want, and I will arrange transportation. If you choose to stay, you are welcome to stay. If you want to help around the place, I will not refuse the help. If you want to be left alone, I can do that too." She stared at him. He picked up his spoon and started eating. "That's it," she said. "That is it," he said. "You are not going to tell me what you expect, what I am here to do, what I owe you." He looked up at her from the bowl. His eyes were steady and dark, and entirely without cruelty. "Miss Carter, somebody already made a very long list of what you owe people, and what you are good for, and what you are not. I did not ask to see that list, and I do not intend to add to it." She sat with that for a moment. Then she picked up her spoon and ate her beans. She stayed. She was not entirely sure why, except that leaving required a plan, and a plan required energy, and the first thing she did after finishing her first meal in the line cabin was sleep for 14 hours on the east side of the curtain, with the bolt locked firmly from the inside. When she woke up, Ethan was already gone. There was coffee on the stove, still warm. There was no note because she would learn that Ethan Brooks did not leave notes. He either said things, or he did not say them. She drank the coffee, standing at the east window, looking out at the enormous Montana morning, and thought about who she was now. She was according to the bill of transfer. Grover had produced a delivery. She was according to her father's letter, a copy of which she had read without her father's knowledge, having long ago learned to read his private correspondence out of pure self-preservation, a resolution to an embarrassing situation. She was according to every man who had ever looked at her in San Francisco, too large, too quiet, too Chinese, too something or other to be worth the effort of genuine attention. She was 23 years old, and she had $37 hidden in the lining of her cloth bag, and she was standing in a cabin in Montana, drinking the coffee of a man she had known for approximately 15 hours. She decided to wash the breakfast dishes. It was a small decision. It was not a surrender. It was not a concession. It was simply the thing that needed doing next. And Mei Lin Carter had survived 23 years by doing the thing that needed doing. Next, one thing at a time, without asking for credit and without expecting rescue. She washed the dishes. Then she looked around the cabin with the eye of someone who had spent years maintaining other people's households without being given the tools or supplies to do it properly, and she started making a mental list. The work of the summer settled around her like weather. Ethan rose before dawn and came back at midday, and went out again and came back at dark. He did not explain his comings and goings, because he did not explain himself, but she pieced it together from context. He was working. The kind of sustained physical unending ranch work that people in San Francisco talked about in the abstract without understanding what it actually meant. She had nothing to do with that work, so she addressed the cabin. The curtains were beyond mending. She took them down, washed the fabric, and found that 2 of the 4 panels were salvageable. She rehung those and used the others to patch a gap in the wall where winter cold clearly came through. She found a box of assorted nails behind the tool shelf and used them to secure 3 cabinet doors that opened when they should not have. She repaired the rocking chair by the fireplace, which had a cracked rung, using strips of rawhide she found coiled near the saddle rack outside. She discovered a small kitchen garden area, 4 raised beds overgrown and neglected on the south side of the cabin. The soil underneath the weeds was dark and good. She cleared it over 3 days and found seeds in a tin on the top shelf of the supply cabinet. Most of them were old, but she planted them anyway, because old seeds sometimes surprised you. She made better use of the woodpile, stacking it properly so the logs dried evenly and the supply did not topple. She organized the tools back on their pegs in a sequence that made operational sense, rather than the sequence of a man who had shoved them back in a hurry after using them. Ethan did not say anything about any of this. He came back. At the end of the 3rd day, stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the cabinet doors that no longer swung open, unprompted, and then he walked to the table and sat down for supper without comment. She set a bowl of stew in front of him. She had found a scrawny jackrabbit at the edge of the garden that morning and had been deeply pleased about it and sat down across from him. The cabinet doors were loose, she said. I noticed, he said. I used the square nails from the box behind the tool shelf. I hope that was all right. It is your cabinet too, he said, which was such an unexpected thing to say that she did not know how to respond to it. They ate in silence. Across the table from her, Ethan Brooks was thinking. Though she did not know this about the letter that had brought her here, and about the man who had written it, and about what it cost a person to spend 23 years being told in direct and indirect ways that they were worth less than they were. He looked at the repaired cabinet doors. I thought about the woman who had fixed them, who had not been asked to fix them, had not been praised for fixing them, had simply seen that they needed fixing, and done it without making it into anything larger than it was. He thought that Walter Carter was either the most foolish man in California or the most foolish man in the country, and that the competition for that particular title was, in his experience, always fierce. He said none of this. What he said was, "Rabbit stew is good." "Thank you," she said. In the 2nd week, 3 things happened that mattered. The first was that Ethan came back to the cabin on a Tuesday afternoon, limping from a barbed wire cut along his right calf that had gone deep enough to need attention. He sat on the edge of this woodpile and was apparently prepared to clean it himself with his hat pushed back and the stoic expression of a man who considers pain a matter between himself and God. Mei Lin came outside, saw the cut, said, "That needs to be cleaned properly or it will go bad." Took his leg by the ankle without asking permission, and cleaned and bound the wound with material from a small kit she had found in the supply cabinet and quietly reorganized. He sat completely still while she worked the way a large animal sits still when it has decided to trust a person. When she finished, he looked at the bandaging neat tight, the knot tied where it would not press against the wound, and said, "Where did you learn that?" "My mother was sick for a long time before she died. she said. "I learned what I could." He nodded once. "Thank you," he said. "You are welcome," she said. She went back inside. He sat for a moment longer on the woodpile, looking at his bound leg, thinking that it was remarkable how much a person could communicate without saying anything beyond the essential minimum. The second thing that happened in the second week was that she found his torn shirts. There were 4 of them folded and set aside in a pile near the back of the curtained sleeping space, not stored with the regular clothing, but separated out. The way you separate things that have been given up on. 2 had torn seams at the shoulders. 1 had a tear across the back from something sharp. 1 had a missing button and a fraying collar. She did not ask him about the shirts. She simply found a needle and thread in the small sewing tin she had added to the supply shelf purchased on credit against Ethan's account at the town mercantile during the single supply trip she had accompanied him on in the first week, though she had added it to her own mental debt column rather than his, and she mended them. All 4. One evening, sitting by the east window in the last of the summer daylight, while Ethan read by the oil lamp at the table, he glanced up once while she was working and then looked back at his book without comment. In the morning, the shirts were folded back on the regular clothing shelf. He wore one of them that day without saying anything. She noticed that he wore it carefully, more carefully than a man usually wears a work shirt, and she understood that in his particular language, that was a kind of thank you. The third thing that happened in the second week was the conversation about her father. It was not a conversation she had planned or wanted. It happened on a Friday evening when the heat had been particularly brutal, and they had both ended up sitting outside the cabin in the cooler air after supper, not particularly talking, just existing in the same space, in the comfortable silence that had become their default. She did not know what made her say it. Exhaustion, possibly. The particular vulnerability that comes from feeling for the first time in a long time that you are somewhere safe enough to lower your guard an inch. "He told people I was simple," she said. Ethan looked at her without speaking. "My father," she said. "He told his business associates that I was not intelligent, that I did not understand things properly. He said it for so long that I think some people actually believed it. I think he might have believed it himself by the end." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Why?" he said. "Because it was easier," she said. "If I was simple, then the problem was me, not him. Not the fact that no matter how much I tried or how quietly I moved or how little trouble I caused, I was never going to be the kind of daughter he wanted. I was never going to be small enough or light enough or—" She stopped. "Or Chinese enough," he said. She looked at him sharply. "My mother was from Guangdong province," she said. "My father is from Boston. He married her when he was 22 and thought it was romantic and different. By the time I was born, he had decided it was neither. I was the evidence of a decision he regretted." Ethan absorbed this without visible reaction, the way he absorbed most things, with complete attention and no performance of emotion. "That is not a simple woman talking," he said. She laughed. She had not planned to laugh. It came out of her sideways, brief and startled. "No," she said. "I suppose it is not." He looked out at the dark grassland for a moment. "My father was not a kind man either," he said. It was more than he typically offered, and she recognized it as such. "I am sorry," she said. "It was a long time ago," he said. "I built something different. That is all you can do." She thought about that for a while. The stars appeared over Montana in extraordinary numbers, the way they only appeared in places that had not yet been crowded out by artificial light. "Ethan," she said. "Yes," he said. "Why did you agree to this, the letter? You did not have to." He thought about it for a moment. He was a man who actually thought about things before answering, which was either one of his most admirable qualities or one of his most maddening ones, depending on the question. "My mother came to this country from Ireland with nothing," he said finally. "She did not choose the ship she came on or the city she arrived in. She did not choose the man she ended up with either at first. But she built a life anyway, out of what was actually there, not what she had been promised." He paused. "I reckon I wanted to see if you could do the same," he said. She was silent for a long moment. "And," she said. He looked at her. In the particular darkness of a Montana night, his expression was unreadable, but his voice when he spoke was quiet and completely certain. "And," he said, "I think your father is the most foolish man in California." The fourth week brought a visitor. She heard the horse first, or rather horses plural, because the kind of man who arrived that afternoon did not travel alone if he could help it. And Clayton Mercer had never been the kind of man who could help anything. He came with 2 riders at his back and a proprietary air that preceded him the way a weather front precedes a storm. He was a large man in expensive clothes, which was the peculiar combination that the territory produced in men who had made their money quickly and wanted everyone to know it. His hat was new, his boots were new. The contempt on his face was very old indeed. Mei Lin was working in the kitchen garden when she heard them come up the track. She straightened and shaded her eyes and watched 3 riders come to a stop in front of the cabin. Ethan came around from the east side of the cabin where he had been repairing a section of the roof. She could still hear the hammer going for 2 more strikes before it stopped, and he appeared at the corner without hurry and looked at the 3 riders. "Mercer," he said. "Brooks," the large man said. He had the voice of a man accustomed to being heard from some distance. "Heard you were out here for the summer. Thought I would ride over and discuss that proposition I mentioned in the spring." "I told you in the spring I was not interested," Ethan said. "That was before I revised the number upward considerably." Mercer smiled the way men smile when they are certain money is going to accomplish whatever they want it to accomplish. "This land is not worth much to you sitting out here as a summer camp. My operation could make something of it." "It makes something for me," Ethan said. Mercer's eyes moved not quickly, but with the deliberate calculation of a man who is looking for weakness, and found Mei Lin standing at the edge of the garden. She did not look away. She had learned over 23 years that looking away from men like Clayton Mercer only encouraged them. "Well now," Mercer said, the smile changing into something less pleasant. "What do we have here?" "Did not know you had taken a wife, Brooks. Or—" He paused, letting the pause do work. "Some other arrangement." Ethan said nothing. "She Chinese," Mercer said. "She is standing right there," Ethan said. "You could ask her." Mercer looked back at Mei Lin with the particular calculation of a man deciding how much something is worth before he offers for it. It was a look she recognized. Her father had looked at her with that same calculation for 23 years. "Big girl," Mercer said. He said it the way you describe a horse's build assessingly, without any awareness that the horse might have opinions about the assessment. "Pretty face, I suppose, for the type." One of the riders behind him chuckled. Mei Lin set down the short-handled garden hoe she had been using. She did it carefully without haste, the way you set something down when you want your hands to be completely free. "Your proposition," Ethan said, his voice giving nothing, "is not something I am interested in. You have had my answer twice. That is the same answer." "Oh, I am not talking about land now," Mercer said. He turned back to Ethan with the smile of a man who has just realized he has found a new kind of lever. "I am talking about that. I could take her off your hands, Brooks. Save you the trouble. A woman that sighs out here in the summer heat, she is more trouble than she is worth, I would think. I could give you a fair price. Better use for her in a town establishment than—" He did not finish the sentence. Mei Lin had walked from the garden to where the splitting maul leaned against the woodpile, a heavy-headed tool used for splitting large rounds of firewood. Not a delicate instrument by any measure. And she had picked it up, and she was walking toward the riders with it held at her side. She was not running. She was not shouting. She was walking with the particular measured pace of a person who has made a decision and is executing it without drama. Mercer's horse shifted nervously. Mercer looked down at her, and then at the maul, and then back at her face, and something in his expression changed. Because what he saw was not hysteria. What he saw was someone who was entirely calm. "You are not finished," she said. "Now listen," Mercer began. "You were saying," she said, stopping about 10 feet from the horse, "that I could be taken off someone's hands, that I am more trouble than I am worth, that I have a fair price and a better use." She looked up at him. Her voice was completely level. "My father said all of those things. He said them for 23 years. I would like you to know that I am very, very tired of hearing them." Mercer stared at her. Behind her, She heard Ethan's boots on the hard ground as he stepped forward to stand beside her, not in front of her, not between her and Mercer, but beside her. She did not look at him. She kept her eyes on Mercer. "She belongs to no one," Ethan said. His voice was quiet. He had not reached for his revolver. He had not raised his fist. He had simply stepped forward beside her and said 4 words in the same tone of voice a man uses to state a fact about weather or terrain, something that is simply and completely true and does not require argument. Mercer sat on his horse for a moment longer, recalculating. Then he turned his horse's head and rode out with his 2 men behind him. He did not look back. Mei Lin stood holding the splitting maul until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely into the distance. Then she set it back against the woodpile. She turned around. Ethan was still standing where he had been watching her with an expression that was different from any expression she had seen on his face in 4 weeks of living 12 feet from each other. "You were not afraid," he said. "I was terrified," she said. "I have just had a lot of practice." He looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted between them quietly and without announcement. The way seasons shift, not at a single dramatic moment, but across an accumulation of small changes, until you look up one day and realize the world is entirely different from what it was. "Come inside," he said. "Supper is going to burn." She followed him inside. For the first time since arriving in Montana, she did not think about the $37 in the lining of her cloth bag, or whether it was enough to get her somewhere she could disappear. She was already somewhere. She just had not recognized it until now. The morning after Clayton Mercer rode away, Mei Lin woke before dawn for the first time since she had arrived in Montana. She did not know what woke her. Not a sound, not a dream. Just her eyes opening in the dark on the east side of the curtain, the bolt locked from the inside, the way she locked it every night, and her mind already running before the rest of her had caught up. She lay still for a moment and listened. Ethan was already up. She could hear him, the quiet, deliberate movements of a man who has learned to move through the dark without disturbing anything. The soft scrape of the coffee pot. The small metallic sound of the wood stove door opening and closing. She got up. She unbolted the curtain door, pushed it back, and came out into the main room in her work dress, her hair still loose, her feet bare on the plank floor. Ethan looked at her across the room. He had the coffee pot in one hand and 2 cups already set on the table, which meant he had heard her moving and had counted on her coming out. "You do not have to be up yet," he said. "I know," she said. She pulled out her chair and sat down. He poured both cups and sat across from her, and for a few minutes they drank their coffee in the particular silence of very early morning, the kind of silence that feels different from all other silences, because the rest of the world has not yet started making noise and everything feels temporarily possible. "He will come back," Mei Lin said. "Probably," Ethan said. "Men like that always come back," she said. "They do not take no for an answer the first time because nobody has ever made the no stick." Ethan looked at her over the rim of his cup. "You sound like you know men like that." "I grew up in a house full of men like that," she said. "My father's business partners, his club associates, men who came to dinner and looked at my mother like she was decorative and looked at me like I was an inconvenience." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "They always came back. The only thing that ever worked was making the cost of coming back higher than the reward." Ethan set his cup down. "What kind of cost are you thinking?" "I do not know yet," she said. "But I am thinking about it." He nodded once slowly, the way he nodded when something had been said that deserved to be taken seriously rather than brushed past. "All right," he said. She looked at him. "That is all right." "You laid out the problem clearly," he said. "You said you are thinking about it. I reckon that is more than most people do before breakfast." She did not know what to do with that, so she finished her coffee and got up and started the cornbread batter. What she had not told him, what she had not told anyone ever, because there had never been anyone to tell, was that she had spent the night thinking about something else entirely. Not Mercer, not strategy, not cost and reward. She had been thinking about the way Ethan had stepped forward to stand beside her. Not in front, beside. It was such a small thing. 4 inches of positioning, a deliberate choice in a moment that had moved quickly enough that most people would not have had time to make a deliberate choice at all. And yet, she had felt it, the specific weight of someone standing next to her rather than in front of her, treating her as a partner in the confrontation rather than a person to be protected from it. She had not experienced that before. She battered the cornbread and tried to decide what to do with the fact that she kept thinking about it. She decided to do nothing with it, which was the sensible decision, and she was very good at sensible decisions. The cornbread turned out better than usual. She chose not to attach any meaning to that. 3 days after Mercer's visit, a woman came to the cabin. She arrived on a dun-colored mare alone at mid-morning, and she was not the kind of woman who arrived anywhere quietly. She was perhaps 50, with iron gray hair pinned under a practical hat, and the kind of face that had been handsome 20 years ago and had become something more interesting since, weathered and direct and completely uninterested in your opinion of it. She pulled up in front of the cabin and called out, "Ethan Brooks, your manners are going to get you talked about," which was apparently a greeting between people who knew each other well. Ethan came around from the east side where he had been working and looked up at her with the nearest thing to a smile that Mei Lin had seen on his face. "Helen," he said, "I did not know you were coming. I did not know I was coming either, until Grover Patterson rode through and mentioned he had dropped off a mail order situation for you, and I decided I needed to see for myself." She was looking at Mei Lin as she said this from the horse with frank and entirely unapologetic curiosity. "You must be the girl." "I am Mei Lin Carter," Mei Lin said. "Helen Marsh," the woman said. "My spread is 4 miles northeast. I have been watching out for Ethan since his mother passed, which is a job I did not volunteer for, but nobody else seemed to be doing." She dismounted with the efficiency of someone who has been getting on and off horses for 40 years. "You hungry? I brought pie. Apple. From last season's preserves, but the crust is good." She produced a cloth-wrapped bundle from her saddlebag, with the confidence of someone who does not bring pie unless it is worth bringing. "Come inside," Mei Lin said, because she had realized in the last 4 weeks that when something was clearly the right thing to do, there was no point in waiting for someone else to say it first. Helen Marsh walked into the cabin, stopped inside the doorway, and looked around. Her eyes moved from the cabinet doors to the mended curtains, to the reorganized tool wall, to the kitchen garden, visible through the east window where 3 weeks of work had produced actual green growth in the raised beds. She turned and looked at Mei Lin. "Grover said you came here with 1 bag, she said. "I did," Mei Lin said. "You have been busy," Helen said. "There was work to do," Mei Lin said. Helen looked at her for a long moment, with the expression of someone revising an estimate upward. "Sit down," she said, as if it were her own kitchen, which Mei Lin found so startling and refreshing that she almost laughed. "I want to hear about where you came from." They sat at the table, all 3 of them, and ate apple pie and talked. Or rather, Helen asked questions and Mei Lin answered them, and Ethan sat with his coffee and watched the exchange with the attentiveness of a man who is learning things he would not have been told directly. "San Francisco," Helen said. "Your father is a merchant." "He was," Mei Lin said. "He is still alive. He is simply no longer my father in any meaningful sense." Helen raised an eyebrow. "He sold me," Mei Lin said, because she had found in the past weeks that the plain truth was easier to manage than careful wording. "He wrote a letter, offered a bill of transfer, and sent me with a hired driver. The way you send furniture you no longer want to a house where it might be of some use." Helen looked at Ethan. Ethan looked back at her with an expression that communicated nothing except that he had heard all of this before. "And you stayed," Helen said to Mei Lin. "I stayed," Mei Lin agreed. "Why?" Mei Lin considered the question seriously because Helen Marsh had the look of someone who expected serious answers. "Because he said I was not obligated to him for anything, and then he proved it by not acting like I was." Helen was quiet for a moment. "That is a low bar," she said. "It was the first time anyone had cleared it," Mei Lin said. Helen looked at Ethan again. He picked up his coffee cup. Something moved between the 2 of them, some long-established conversational shorthand. And then Helen turned back to Mei Lin with a different expression. Less evaluating, more decided. Clayton Mercer came out here yesterday, she said. The room got slightly quieter. 3 days ago, Mei Lin said. He stopped at my property on his way back to town, Helen said. He was not in a good humor. He told me Ethan had gotten above himself. She paused. He also said some things about you that I will not repeat, because they do not deserve to be repeated, but that you should know were said. I can imagine what they were, Mei Lin said. I expect you can, Helen said. Mercer has been trying to buy this land for 2 years. He has never been told no by anyone who stayed told no. She looked at Mei Lin steadily. He is going to make trouble. I know, Mei Lin said. What are you going to do about it? And here was the thing about Helen Marsh. Mei Lin was realizing she asked the question, and then she waited. Actually waited for the answer. She did not fill the silence with her own answer. She did not suggest and call it asking. She simply waited. I have not decided yet, Mei Lin said. But I will. Helen finished her pie. She stood up, straightened her hat, and looked at Ethan. She'll do, she said. Ethan said nothing. That is a compliment, Helen told Mei Lin. From me, that is the highest one available. She went outside and rode away on her dun mare, and she did not look back either, which Mei Lin was beginning to think was a characteristic of people in this territory. They arrived and departed with equal directness, without lingering in doorways or hedging their exits. She started clearing the pie plates. She likes you, Ethan said. She evaluated me, Mei Lin said. With Helen, those are the same thing, he said. The evaluation she did not expect came from a different direction entirely. It came on a Tuesday the 5th week from a boy named Thomas, who was 11 years old, and had clearly been riding out to the cabin on some pretext he had constructed carefully enough that he was prepared to defend it if asked. He presented himself at midday with a dead rabbit hanging from one hand, and the explanation that he had found it on the property line and thought maybe they could use it. Ethan looked at the rabbit. He looked at the boy. Thomas, he said, how far is the property line from your mother's house? The boy considered this. Not that far, he said. Try again. 4 miles, Thomas admitted. So you rode 4 miles in the midday heat to bring us a rabbit? Yes, sir. Because you found it on the property line? Yes, sir. 4 miles from home. Thomas squared his shoulders. Miss Helen said there was a new woman at the line cabin. I wanted to see. Mei Lin, who had appeared in the doorway during this exchange, said, Hello, Thomas. He turned and looked at her, and the combination of his age and his transparency meant that his face showed exactly what he thought, which was that this was not what he had expected. She could not have said what he had expected, but clearly it was something different from a woman in a work dress with her hair in a practical braid and dirt on her hands from the garden. Hello, ma'am, he said carefully. The rabbit is a good size, she said. Have you eaten? No, ma'am. Come in then. He came in. He ate 3 portions of cornbread and beans and talked because Thomas, unlike Ethan, experienced silence as something that needed to be filled about his mother's farm. His older sister, who had married a man in Billings and moved away the 2 horses his family kept, the teacher at the territory school, who was strict but fair, and the ongoing dispute between 2 ranches to the south that everyone apparently talked about at length whenever they gathered. Mei Lin listened and asked questions and refilled his cup, and Ethan sat at the table and said very little, but she noticed that he watched Thomas with the quiet attention of a man who is familiar with the boy and fond of him in the reserved way he was fond of things. Are you from China? Thomas asked her abruptly, the way 11-year-olds transition between subjects. My mother was, Mei Lin said. I was born in San Francisco. Do you know how to fight? He said. Miss Helen said you had a splitting maul. Ethan made a sound that might, under other circumstances, have been a laugh. I picked it up, Mei Lin said. That is not the same as fighting. Still, Thomas said with the assessment of someone who has thought about this. Most ladies would not have picked it up. Most people would not have needed to, she said. I have had some practice needing to. Thomas thought about this seriously, the way children think when they are actually processing, rather than performing consideration. My pa died 2 winters ago, he said. Fever. Ma says we just keep going. He looked at his cornbread. I reckon that is what you do too. The table was quiet for a moment. "Yes," Mei Lin said. "That is what you do." Thomas finished his meal and said goodbye with considerably more warmth than he had arrived with and rode back the 4 miles to his mother's farm, with the particular satisfied air of a boy who had accomplished what he came to accomplish, even if the stated reason had been a rabbit. Ethan watched him go from the doorway. "His mother is a good woman," he said. "Hard year for her." "How old were the children when their father died?" Thomas was 9. His sister was already gone by then. He paused. "He comes out here sometimes. I do not think he knows why." "He knows why," Mei Lin said. "He needs to be somewhere where men behave like men are supposed to." Ethan looked at her. She went back to the garden. It was in the 6th week that the silence between them changed. Not broke changed. It had never been an uncomfortable silence. From the first days, it had been the silence of two people who were each accustomed to being alone and had found an unexpected comfort in being alone together. But somewhere in the 6th week, it became something different, warmer and more alert, the silence of two people who are paying attention to each other without being ready to say so out loud. She noticed it on a Thursday when she brought water from the spring, and he came to take the heavy pails from her without being asked. The way he took heavy things from her without being asked, and their hands overlapped on the pail handle for a moment, and neither of them moved immediately. He looked at her. She looked at him. Then she let go of the pail and went back to the cabin and stood at the east window for a moment looking at nothing, and told herself very firmly that she was not going to make any decisions about anything until she understood this place and this man better than she currently did. She was very good at making sensible decisions. She was finding that sensible decisions were getting harder to make when Ethan Brooks was standing 12 feet away. The letter arrived on a Friday. Not from her father. She had expected one from her father eventually, some accounting of what she owed him, or what she had cost him, or what she should be grateful for. But this letter came with a different return address, and it was addressed to Ethan, and she would not have known about it, except that Ethan set it open on the table that evening and looked at it for a long time without speaking, and eventually she said, "Do you want to talk about it?" He slid it across the table. It was from Clayton Mercer's lawyer. The letter was formal and precise and extremely unpleasant. It claimed that Ethan Brooks was occupying government land under a lease that had lapsed and had not been properly renewed, that Mercer Cattle Company had filed a competing claim, and that unless Brooks could produce the original deed documentation within 30 days, the matter would be referred to the Territorial Land Office for adjudication. Mei Lin read it twice. "Is the deed documentation available?" she said. "It is at the main house," Ethan said. "Then go get it." "I cannot leave right now. The east fence line has a section down, and if it stays down, the herd will drift into the creek drainage, and I will lose—" He stopped. She looked at him. He had said the herd. Not a few cattle, a herd. She had not asked about this, and he had not explained it, but she was beginning to understand that the line cabin was not all there was. She had understood this intellectually since the conversation on his front porch where he had mentioned building something. She had not pressed for details because it had not seemed relevant to daily life, but the word herd had a weight to it that suggested more than the 2 horses in the paddock beside the cabin. She put this aside. "I can ride the east fence line," she said. He looked at her. "I can ride," she said. "My mother taught me before she got sick. I am not skilled, but I am competent. If the fence is down, I can see where it is down and come back and tell you. It is 3 miles of fence line." "Then I will be gone 3 hours," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "The gray mare is the calmer one." "All right." "Stay on the near side of the creek." "All right." He pushed back from the table and looked at the letter and looked at her and said, "I will have the deed documentation back within a week. Mercer is not going to win this." "I know he is not," she said, "but you still need the documentation." "I know I do." He folded the letter and put it in his shirt pocket. "Thank you." "You are welcome," she said, and she meant it entirely. She rode the east fence line the next morning. The gray mare was indeed calmer than Mei Lin. If she was being honest with herself, because it had been 3 years since she had ridden, and her body needed 15 minutes to remember what it knew. But it came back the way things come back when they were properly learned in the first place. And by the time she reached the first stake, she was sitting straight and easy, and the mare was moving in a steady, comfortable walk that covered ground without fuss. She found the section of downed fence 2 miles out. 4 posts pulled from the ground. The wire rolled back and left deliberately. The kind of thing that does not happen by accident or weather, but by the deliberate application of human hands with a specific intention. She sat the mare and looked at it. Then she turned and rode back at a faster pace than she had ridden out. Ethan was at the paddock when she came back. He saw her face before she said a word, and he straightened. "It was pulled," she said, "not fallen. 4 posts wire rolled back neat. Someone did it on purpose." He was quiet. "Mercer," she said. "Or someone working for him," Ethan said. "Same thing. The herd will drift if it is not repaired." "I know. Then we repair it today," she said. He looked at her for a moment. She was still on the mare, slightly out of breath, her hair coming loose from its braid, with the directness in her expression of someone who has made a decision and is not interested in reconsidering it. He said. "I can carry fence posts," she said. "I have been hauling water and splitting kindling for 6 weeks. I am not made of glass." He went to the equipment shed and loaded the wagon without another word. They fixed the fence together. It took 4 hours in the summer heat, and it was the hardest physical labor she had done since arriving. And when it was done, she sat on the tailgate of the wagon, and her arms were shaking slightly from the effort, and Ethan handed her a canteen without comment. She drank. He sat beside her on the tailgate. "You grew up in the city," he said. "I did," she said. "You never did anything like this." "I never did anything like any of this," she said. "I had never cooked on a wood stove or hauled water from a spring or planted a kitchen garden or mended fence wire or—" She stopped. "I had never been treated like I had any practical value, so I had never tried to find out whether I did." He was quiet for a moment. "You have considerable practical value," he said. It was the most direct thing he had ever said to her, that was not about logistics, and it landed the way direct things land when you have been hungry for them without knowing it, harder and warmer than you expected. "Thank you," she said. "It is not a compliment," he said. "It is an accurate statement." "I know," she said. "That is why I said thank you." He handed her a strip of dried beef from his coat pocket, which was such an Ethan thing to do in the aftermath of an emotionally significant moment that she almost laughed again, and she ate it, and they sat on the tailgate in the late afternoon heat, looking at 4 miles of repaired fence line, and neither of them said anything for a long time. "Ethan," she said. "Yes," he said. "The letter from Mercer's lawyer, the 30-day deadline. If you ride to the main house to get the documentation, how long will you be gone?" 2 days there and back," he said. "And you are worried about leaving the cabin and the stock." "I am," he said. "I can manage for 2 days," she said. He looked at her. "I know where the supplies are," she said. "I know the animals' routines. I know the fence we just fixed is solid. I can manage for 2 days." He was quiet for a long moment. "The rifle is on the wall hook inside the door," he said. She nodded. "There is ammunition in the tin on the top shelf, not the coffee tin, the one next to it." "I know which tin," she said. "If anyone comes." "I will manage," she said. "Go get the documentation. We are not losing this cabin to Clayton Mercer." He looked at her for a moment, with that expression she was beginning to recognize, the one that was not quite surprise and not quite respect, but was somewhere between them, the expression of a man recalibrating something he thought he had already calculated. "We," he said again. "We," she said without apology. He got up from the tailgate, walked to the front of the wagon and picked up the reins. "I will be back in 2 days," he said. "I know," she said. He rode out before sunrise the next morning, and she stood in the cabin doorway and watched him go and did not feel the cold, settling anxiety she had expected to feel, the one she had carried for 23 years about being alone. She felt instead something closer to steadiness. She bolted the door, put the coffee on, and went to work. He came back in 36 hours instead of 48. She heard the horse on the track while she was mending his last torn shirt, the one with the collar that had needed the most work, and she set it down and went to the window, and there he was riding through the last of the evening light, a leather satchel across the saddle in front of him. He came inside. He set the satchel on the table. He looked around the cabin, the swept floor, the stacked firewood, the supper pot on the stove, and then he looked at her. "You got the documents," she said. "I got the documents," he said. "And you came back early." He looked at her steadily. "I did not like being gone." It was 4 words. 4 plain words in the flat declarative voice he used for accurate statements about weather and fence repairs and the practical value of a person. She picked up the mended shirt from the table and held it out to him. "Your collar is fixed," she said, because the alternative was to say something that she had not yet decided she was ready to say. He took the shirt. He looked at it. He looked at her. "Mei Lin," he said. "Yes," she said. "I am going to write a response to Mercer's lawyer tomorrow," he said. "I would like you to read it before I send it." She blinked. "You want me to read your legal correspondence? You are sharper than any lawyer I have hired," he said. "And you have better reasons to want Mercer dealt with permanently." She held his gaze for a moment. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. I went to hang up his coat, and she turned back to the stove and stirred the pot and thought about the way he had said, "I did not like being gone," the way a person says a true thing, simply without dressing it up or walking it back. And she decided that whatever sensible decisions she had been planning to make about not deciding anything too soon, they were going to be considerably harder to hold to than she had originally anticipated. The supper was better than usual that night. She chose not to attach any meaning to that either, and she was almost convincing about it. The response to Mercer's lawyer took them 3 evenings to write, not because the legal case was complicated. The deed documentation Ethan had retrieved from the main house was complete and unambiguous, filed properly with the territorial office in 1879, signed and countersigned, and entirely without the gap that Mercer's people had apparently assumed existed. The case was straightforward. What took 3 evenings was Mei Lin reading the first draft, setting it down, and saying, "This is too polite." Ethan looked at her across the table. "It is a legal letter. It is a legal letter that sounds like a man who is slightly embarrassed to be in a dispute," she said. "Which is exactly how Mercer wants you to sound. It gives him room to keep pushing." She picked up the pen. "May I?" He leaned back in his chair and said, "Go ahead." She rewrote the middle 3 paragraphs. She kept the formal language because the formal language was necessary. But she removed every sentence that apologized for taking up space on the page, every softening phrase, every construction that left a door open for negotiation on a point that did not require negotiation. When she was done, the letter said exactly what needed to be said, and nothing more and nothing less, and every sentence landed like a post-driven flush into hard ground. She slid it back across the table. Ethan read it. He read it again. "Where did you learn to write like this?" he said. "My father's correspondence," she said. "I read every letter that came through that house for 8 years. I learned what worked and what did not." "You read his private correspondence." "He was making decisions that affected my life without consulting me," she said. "I needed information. I got it the way that was available to me." He looked at her for a moment. "He does not know that." "No," she said. "He does not." Something moved across Ethan's face that was not quite a smile, but was in the same family. "All right," he said. He copied the revised letter in his own hand, signed it, and sealed it. "This goes to town tomorrow." "Good," she said. She gathered the drafts and fed them to the wood stove because there was no reason to keep them, and every reason to leave no record of what had been argued over and revised, and she watched the paper catch and turn to nothing, and felt something settle in her chest that she could not quite name, but that felt remarkably like competence being recognized for what it was. Jesse rode out from the main house the following Tuesday. He was 19, lean as a fencer, with the kind of cheerful face that deflects hard weather, the way a good hat brim deflects rain, and he arrived mid-morning with a supply pack, and the news that 2 of the north pasture fence lines had been cut in the same deliberate hand-rolled wire style as the east fence Mei Lin had found 3 weeks earlier. Ethan heard this without changing expression. "How many head drifted?" 14 that we found, Jesse said. "Marcus thinks there might be more in the creek drainage. He has got 3 men riding it now." "Who else knows?" "Besides the ranch crew, nobody yet." Ethan nodded. "Keep it that way." Jesse glanced at Mei Lin with the open curiosity of a young man who has heard things from a distance and wants to reconcile them with what he is actually seeing. She was at the work table cutting dried venison into strips for the next day's work, and she looked back at him with the calm directness that she had learned over weeks was the most efficient way to handle being looked at. "You are Jesse," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he said with the slight adjustment of a person recalibrating their posture without entirely knowing why. "Ethan has mentioned you," she said. "He said you ride fast." "Yes, ma'am." He straightened slightly. "That is useful," she said. "We are going to need it." Jesse looked at Ethan with the expression of someone waiting for confirmation. "She is right," Ethan said. "Sit down. We need to talk through what Mercer is doing and what we are going to do about it." They sat all 3 of them at the rough table, and Ethan laid it out plainly. Mercer had tried the legal route, and the legal route had been closed. So now he was moving to pressure fence cutting stock drift, small erosions that individually could be explained as coincidence and collectively constituted a campaign. The goal was to make the line cabin operation too costly to maintain until Ethan gave up the summer posting and removed himself from the disputed land. "He does not know the full picture," Mei Lin said. Jesse looked at her. "He thinks Ethan is a lone operation working from this cabin," she said. "He thinks the strain of running a summer range from here, combined with the legal threat and the fence cutting, will make it not worth holding. He is making his calculations based on incomplete information." "That is right," Ethan said. "So we do not correct the information," she said. "We let him keep making those calculations. We repair the fences quietly, we retrieve the drifted stock quietly, and we do not give him any sign that his pressure is registering." "And in the meantime," Jesse asked. "In the meantime," Ethan said, "we find out who is cutting the wire." Jesse went still. "You want to catch them at it?" "I want a name," Ethan said. "Mercer does not cut wire himself. He pays someone. A name gives us a witness if this ever goes before the territorial court." "That means somebody watching the fence lines at night," Jesse said. "It means you and Marcus working out a rotation," Ethan said. "Can Marcus manage that without it getting around town?" "Marcus can manage anything without it getting around," Jesse said with the certainty of someone who has watched a man handle difficult situations for years. "He is the quietest person I have ever known besides you." Ethan looked at Mei Lin. She had been thinking about something while the 2 of them talked, and she said, "Mercer came here personally the first time. He has not come back since I picked up the splitting maul. He is working at a distance now because he does not want another conversation that goes the way the first one did." "That is his disadvantage," Ethan said. "It is," she said. "People who work at a distance think they are safer. They stop watching the near ground." Jesse was looking at her with the expression of a young man who has arrived expecting one thing and is receiving quite another. "She is right about that too," Ethan said. Jesse pushed back from the table and picked up his hat. "I will tell Marcus tonight," he said. "We will have a rotation in place by the weekend." He paused at the door. "Ma'am." "Jesse," she said. He left. Ethan looked at her across the table. "You did not tell me the fence idea last night," he said. "I was still working it out last night," she said. "I needed to hear what Jesse said about the north lines to know that the pattern was intentional and systematic rather than opportunistic. Opportunistic and systematic require different responses." He was quiet for a moment. "Mei Lin," he said. "Yes." "Where would you be right now if you had gone back to San Francisco with the $37? She looked at him. The question was unexpected enough that she did not reach for a careful answer, which meant the answer that came out was the true one. "Alone," she said. "In a city that has no use for me. working mending jobs in the back rooms of houses where the front room women looked through me. She paused. Surviving. I am good at surviving. I am better at this. He nodded once. So am I, he said. And the way he said it made it clear that this was not a comment about ranch strategy. She got up and went to the stove to start supper, and told herself for the 4th time in 2 weeks that she was not going to make any decisions she was not ready to make. She was becoming less convincing about it each time. The wire cutter turned out to be a man named Dolan. Marcus found him on the 3rd night of the rotation, a hired hand from Mercer's South operation, working alone in the dark with a pair of lineman's pliers, and the confidence of someone who had done this before, without consequence. Marcus did not confront him. He watched. He noted the direction Dolan came from, and the direction he left, and he came to the cabin at sunrise the next morning, with the information delivered in the quiet, complete sentences of a man who understood that the value of what he had seen lay in how carefully it was used. Marcus was perhaps 45 with a broad face and hands that looked like they had been built rather than grown. And he looked at Mei Lin when he came in with the same evaluating frankness that Helen Marsh had shown, except where Helen's evaluation had been direct. Marcus's was patient, the way a man evaluates terrain before he decides how to cross it. "You are Marcus," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Coffee." "Please," he said. She poured 3 cups, and they sat. Marcus told them about Dolan. He told them which fence section, which direction, which hour. He told them that Dolan had a horse tied a 1/4 mile back and rode directly south when he was done, which was the direction of Mercer's South camp. He told them that Dolan worked neatly and fast, like a man who had been given specific instructions, rather than a general directive, which suggested Mercer was directing the operation in detail, rather than delegating it. "He will be back," Ethan said. "Friday or Saturday," Marcus said. "He works every 3rd night. This was Wednesday." "We need him to do it one more time," Mei Lin said. Both men looked at her. "We need him to cut wire with someone watching who can testify to it," she said. "Not just observe testify, in a territorial proceeding. Marcus watching alone is useful, but it is one man's word against Mercer's money. We need a second witness." "You are thinking about the territorial court," Ethan said. "I am thinking about every option simultaneously," she said. "Mercer has filed a legal claim. He is cutting fence wire. He made verbal statements about this property in front of witnesses. Every one of those is a thread, and if we pull them together at the right time in the right forum, there is no version of this where he wins." Marcus looked at Ethan with the expression of a man receiving information he did not have before. "Where did you find her?" he said. "San Francisco," Ethan said. "You want me to bring Jesse as the second witness," Marcus said to Mei Lin. "Jesse and whoever in town you trust who is not connected to Mercer's business interests," she said. "Is there a justice of the peace?" "Judge Hartley," Marcus said. "He is not in Mercer's pocket." "Then Judge Hartley needs to know before Friday that there is an active fence-cutting operation on this property that can be witnessed in the act." She picked up her cup. "Can you get to town and back before Friday?" "Today is Thursday," Marcus said. "I know," she said. He stood up. He looked at Ethan once more. Ethan gave him a single nod. Marcus put on his hat and went to the door. "Ma'am," he said. "Thank you, Marcus," she said. He left. The cabin was quiet. Ethan set down his cup and looked at her across the table and said, "You have been planning this since Jesse told us about the north fence lines." "I have been planning this since I read Mercer's lawyer's letter," she said. "The fence cutting was the part I did not know about yet. When Jesse told us, the shape of it became clearer. You did not tell me." "I was not certain until Marcus confirmed the pattern." She met his eyes steadily. "I would not have brought you something I was not certain of." He held her gaze for a moment. "My father," he said, "used to say that the most dangerous person in any room was the one who had thought further ahead than everyone else and was not advertising it." "Your father sounds like he was occasionally correct," she said. "He was," Ethan said. "On the things that mattered." He paused. "Mei Lin." "Yes." "After this is settled." He stopped. She waited. He looked at the table for a moment with the expression of a man who has decided to say something he has been turning over for a while and is choosing his words with unusual care. After this is settled, he said, I want to show you something, above the ridge. There is something I should have shown you earlier, and I did not, and I am going to need to explain why. She looked at him. All right, she said. All right, he said. Neither of them said anything further about it. But it sat between them for the rest of the day like a door that had been unlocked and not yet opened, and Mei Lin found herself thinking about it when she should have been thinking about other things, which was happening with increasing frequency when it came to Ethan Brooks. Dolan came on Saturday night. He came at midnight, the way Marcus had predicted, from the south across open ground. He did not see the three men waiting in the dark 100 yards up the fence line because they were downwind and still, and Marcus had chosen the position with the patience of a man who understood that the most important part of any waiting was the waiting itself. Jesse was one of the three. The third was a man named Cowboy, who worked at the livery in town and had no connection to Mercer's business, and happened to owe Marcus a considerable personal favor from several years back. They watched Dolan cut wire for 20 minutes. Then Marcus stood up and said from a distance that was close enough to be heard clearly and far enough to be safe, "We see you, Dolan." The man went rigid. He did not run. He looked across the dark toward the voice and made the calculation that most men make in that moment, whether to bolt or to brazen it out, and decided on the second, which was the more foolish choice, but the more common one. "Just checking fences," he said. "With lineman's pliers at midnight, Cowboy said. Dolan looked in the direction of the second voice, and the calculation shifted. "I work for Mercer," he said. "This is Mercer's right-of-way." "It is not," Jesse said from the third position. "We have the deed documentation. Would you like to hear it read out?" There was a long pause. "Mercer told me this was claimed land," Dolan said. He sounded less certain now. The certainty of a man who has been told something and has repeated it enough times to believe it is different from the certainty of a man who knows it firsthand, and Dolan was discovering the distance between the two. "Mercer told you a great many things," Marcus said. "Judge Hartley is going to be interested in hearing what specifically those things were and when he told them to you." Another pause, longer this time. "Judge Hartley," Dolan said. "He was made aware of the situation yesterday," Marcus said. "He is expecting a formal account. You can provide yours voluntarily, or you can provide it because you have no other choice. One of those options is considerably better for you than the other." Dolan stood in the dark for a moment. Then he said, "I need to think about this." "You have until Monday morning," Marcus said. "After that, the account I give is the only one on record." They let him go. Marcus came to the cabin before sunrise with the report delivered in the same precise, quiet sentences as always. Ethan listened. Mei Lin listened. When Marcus finished, she said, "He will talk." "You think so?" Jesse asked. "High as a hired hand," she said. "Mercer is paying him to do a job. He is not paying him to take a territorial charge by himself. The moment Dolan understands that Mercer will not protect him from the consequence of what he has been hired to do, his loyalty evaporates." She paused. "Men like Mercer always think the people they hire are more committed to them than they are. It is one of their consistent mistakes." Jesse looked at Marcus. "She is right," Marcus said, with the settled tone of someone confirming something they already believed. Dolan came to Judge Hartley's office Monday morning. He talked for 2 hours. The news reached Clayton Mercer by Tuesday afternoon. Mei Lin knew this not because anyone told her directly, but because Mercer rode to the cabin himself on Wednesday, and he came alone this time without the 2 riders he had brought on his first visit, which told her everything she needed to know about how the calculation had shifted. He looked different from the first visit. Not smaller. Mercer was not the kind of man who got smaller, but tighter. Like something that has been held under pressure long enough to show it in the set of the jaw and the eyes. Ethan was outside at the paddock when Mercer arrived. He saw the rider coming and stayed where he was, arms folded on the paddock rail, and waited. Mercer pulled up. "Brooks," he said. "Mercer," Ethan said. "I understand there has been some misunderstanding about the fence lines." "There has not been a misunderstanding about anything," Ethan said. "A man named Dolan cut wire on this property on 3 separate occasions on your instruction. Judge Hartley has his account. Mercer's expression shifted. Dolan is not reliable. Judge Hartley seemed to find him reliable enough. Ethan looked at him. What do you want, Mercer? I want to resolve this without it becoming a larger matter, Mercer said. Mei Lin came out of the cabin. She had heard the horse, and she had come to the door, and she stood in the doorway for a moment, and then she walked out to where Ethan was standing the way she had walked to stand beside him the first time. Not behind him. Beside. Mercer looked at her. Something in his expression. Not remorse. Men like Mercer did not do remorse, but something in the same category as recalculation moved across his face. You want to resolve it, Mei Lin said. What you mean is that you want it resolved in a way that does not cost you anything. Mercer looked back at her. I did not come here to negotiate with me, she said. You were going to say with me, and yet here I am. She did not raise her voice. She had not raised her voice at him the first time either. She found that the level voice unsettled men like Mercer more than volume did, because volume they knew how to respond to, and the level voice gave them nothing to push against. Judge Hartley has Dolan's account. He has the deed documentation. He has testimony from 3 witnesses about Saturday night. The only question remaining is whether this goes forward formally, or whether you withdraw your competing claim and walk away. Mercer stared at her. You have no standing here, he said, but there was something hollow in it now, the way a bluff sounds when the other person has already seen the hand. I have considerable standing here, she said. I live here. I work here. I was present when you made verbal statements about this property and about me that are now part of what Judge Hartley is aware of. She looked at him steadily. Your competing claim is based on a gap in the lease documentation that does not exist. Your lawyer either knew that and filed anyway, which is one kind of problem, or did not know it and filed regardless, which is another kind. Either way, it does not hold. Mercer looked at Ethan. You are going to let her? She is not speaking for me, Ethan said. She is speaking for herself. I happen to agree with everything she has said. Silence. The horse shifted beneath Mercer. He controlled it with the automatic ease of a man who has been riding for 40 years, and Mei Lin watched him make the final calculation, the one he had been avoiding since Monday, the one Dolan's account had made unavoidable, and arrive at the answer that the arithmetic had always been pointing toward. I will have my lawyer withdraw the claim, he said. Within the week, Mei Lin said. Mercer looked at her one more time, and what was in his face was not respect. She did not expect respect from Clayton Mercer, and would not have trusted it if it appeared, but a species of acknowledgement. The acknowledgement of a man who has met a wall where he expected an open field. Within the week, he said. He turned his horse and rode out. Ethan did not watch him go. He was looking at Mei Lin. She was watching Mercer's back until the rider was small enough in the distance that the tension she had been holding perfectly still, perfectly level, perfectly controlled, could release without being seen. Her hands were shaking slightly. She put them in her apron pockets. You were afraid, Ethan said. Terrified, she said. I have told you before. I have just had a lot of practice. He will withdraw the claim, Ethan said. Yes, she said. He has too much to lose if it goes forward. Men like Mercer do not fight wars they cannot win. They look for easier ground. She paused. He will find some other piece of land to pursue, and he will use the same methods because they work often enough to be worth using. He will just not use them here. Because of you, Ethan said. Because of all of us, she said. Marcus and Jesse and Calloway and Judge Hartley. I put the pieces together. They were your pieces. I was quiet for a moment. Mei Lin, he said. She looked at him. He reached out and took hold of her right wrist gently, with the same care he used for everything that mattered, and drew her hand out of her apron pocket. He held it for a moment, the trembling in her fingers without comment. Then he put her hand back. Come have coffee, he said. She followed him inside. She sat down at the table and wrapped both hands around a warm cup, and the trembling stopped gradually, the way it always stopped when the thing you had been bracing against finally passed. The ridge, she said. He looked at her. You said after this was settled, she said. You said you would show me something above the ridge, and that you would explain why you had not shown me before." He was quiet. "It is settled," she said. "Mercer will withdraw. The wires are repaired. The stock is recovered." She looked at him steadily. "What is above the ridge, Ethan?" He set down his cup. He looked at her for a long moment, longer than usual, which for Ethan Brooks meant something because he was not a man who needed length of time to think, and she understood that she was watching him decide something. Not what to say. He already knew what to say. He was deciding when, and he had apparently decided that the when was now. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "we will ride up together." She held his gaze. "All right. You will want to bring your coat," he said. "It is higher than it looks." "All right," she said again. She drank her coffee. Outside, the summer afternoon was moving toward evening, and the light across the Montana grassland was doing what it always did at this hour, going long and golden, and so entirely beautiful that it made you ache slightly for no reason you could name. She had noticed this effect every evening for 7 weeks, and it had not diminished. She thought about tomorrow. She thought about what was above the ridge, and why he had not shown her before, and what it would mean that he was showing her now. And she thought about the way he had held her trembling hand for just a moment gently, without making it into anything larger than the simple human acknowledgement that a person who had been afraid was allowed to show it. She thought about what it meant to be in a place where you were allowed to show it. She finished her coffee and stood up and started supper, and the cabin filled with the smell of wood smoke and dried venison, and the particular warmth of a small enclosed space in the evening, and Ethan sat at the table reading, and the silence between them was the kind that does not need to be filled. She had never had that before either. She was beginning to understand that she had arrived in Montana with a list of things she had never had, and that the list was getting shorter every week, and that this was the most frightening and most extraordinary thing that had ever happened to her. She did not sleep well that night, not from anxiety exactly, and not from fear, those she knew the shape of and could manage. This was different. This was the particular restlessness that comes from standing at the edge of something large without being able to see the bottom of it and knowing that tomorrow you are going to have to look. She lay on the east side of the curtain with the bolt locked from the inside, the way she locked it every night, and she stared at the ceiling and thought about 7 weeks. 7 weeks since Grover had driven away and left her standing in a road in Montana holding a cloth bag. 7 weeks of wood smoke and dried venison and fence wire and cornbread, and the particular silence of a man who said what he meant and meant what he said, and never once added a syllable more than was necessary. 7 weeks of becoming someone she had not known she was capable of being. She thought about what Ethan had said by the paddock rail. She is speaking for herself. I happen to agree with everything she has said. She thought about the way he had held her trembling hand for one moment, and then given it back to her without making it into anything she did not have language for yet. She thought about the word tomorrow and what was above the ridge, and why he had not shown her before, and what it would mean that he was showing her now. She did not arrive at any conclusions. She got up at first light, put the coffee on, and braided her hair. Howe was already dressed when she came out of the curtained space. He had his hat and his coat, and the expression of a man who has also not slept especially well, but is not going to make a point of it. She poured 2 cups. She set his in front of him. She sat down across the table in the particular morning quiet that had become the most reliable part of her day. This first half hour before the work of the day began, when everything was still possible and nothing had gone wrong yet. You did not sleep, she said. No, he said. Are you going to tell me why? He looked at his cup for a moment. Same reason you did not, I reckon. She looked at him. He looked back at her. Neither of them said anything further about it, which was, she had learned its own kind of conversation. They drank their coffee. She made cornbread from the last of the week's flour, and they ate it at the table, and then she washed the dishes, and he saddled both horses, the gray mare for her and his own bay gelding, and by mid-morning they were riding. The ridge was north. She had seen it from the garden, the long dark spine of elevated ground that ran across the northern horizon, and gave the cabin its sense of being in a contained space, tucked below something larger. She had not ridden toward it before. She had ridden east for the fence line and south when she had accompanied Ethan to the supply road, but always the ridge had stayed where it was north. A fixed boundary she had never questioned, because there had always been more immediate things to attend to. Now she was riding toward it, and she noticed that the closer they got, the quieter Ethan became, which had not seemed possible given his baseline. They rode for nearly an hour. The terrain climbed gradually, and then more steeply, and the horses worked, and she focused on her riding and on keeping the gray mare collected on the loose ground. Ethan rode slightly ahead and slightly to her left, close enough to be present, and far enough to give her the space to manage the climb herself, which was exactly right, and she appreciated it without saying so. Near the top, the slope leveled briefly, and then the trail bent through a gap between two outcroppings of rock, and Ethan stopped his horse. He turned in the saddle and looked at her. "Before we go through," he said. She pulled the mare up beside him. "What I am about to show you," he said, and stopped. He looked at her steadily. "I want to explain why you have not seen it before. Not as an excuse, as an explanation. There is a difference." "I know there is," she said. "When I received your father's letter," he said, "I was angry, not at you. I want to be very clear about that, at the situation, at the kind of man your father is, and the kind of transaction he thought he was conducting." He paused. "I agreed to the arrangement because I thought I needed to understand what you were made of without the weight of what I have pressing on the judgment." She was very still on the mare. "If I had brought you to the main house first," he said, "everything that came after would have been different. You would not have known whether you were staying because you wanted to or because it was easier than leaving. I would not have known whether what you showed me was who you were or who you were performing to be." He held her gaze. "I needed to know who you were when there was nothing to be gained from impressing me." The wind came through the gap in the rocks. The mare shifted. She stilled it. "You tested me," she said. "No," he said immediately. "It was not a test. A test has a pass and a fail. I was not looking for you to pass anything. I was—" He stopped again, and she recognized this as unusual, because Ethan Brooks did not typically stop and start. He said what he meant the first time. "I wanted you to have the chance to be yourself before you knew the rest. I wanted that for me, and I think I wanted it for you." She sat with that. The morning light was doing something particular above the ridge line. She could see it from here, a brightening that suggested the land opened considerably on the other side, and she thought about 7 weeks of who she had been in the line cabin. The woman who had mended shirts and fixed cabinet doors and hauled water and ridden fence lines and faced Clayton Mercer with a splitting maul and a level voice. The woman who had eaten rabbit stew and talked to Thomas about keeping on and rewritten legal correspondence and sat on a tailgate with shaking hands in the late afternoon. That woman had been real. She had been entirely, completely real. Not performed, not calculated, not constructed to impress anyone, because she had not known there was anything to impress. "All right," she said. He looked at her. "All right. I understand why you did it," she said. "I do not love that you did it. But I understand it, and I believe you when you say it was not a test." She held his eyes. "What I want you to understand is that the woman you saw in that cabin for 7 weeks is who I am. Not a version of who I am. Not the best version, just who I am." "I know that," he said. "I want to make sure you know that," she said. "Because what you are about to show me is not going to change it. Whatever is on the other side of that ridge, I am still the woman who fixed your cabinet doors without being asked." Something moved across his face that she had not seen before. It was more than the almost smile. It was something quieter and more complete and entirely without performance. "I know," he said again. "That is why I am showing you." He turned his horse and rode through the gap. She followed. She had thought she was prepared. She was not prepared. The ridge opened onto a valley that had no right to exist behind a line of rock and scrub country that had given no indication of what it was concealing. The valley was vast and green in the particular way that well-watered Montana land is green in high summer. Not the tentative green of the cabin garden, but the deep, certain green of land that has been receiving water and attention for years. She could see the rivers from the ridge, two of them threading through the bottomland with the unhurried confidence of water that belongs where it is. And the cattle, thousands of them, spread across the valley floor in the loose, shifting pattern of a healthy herd that has enough space and enough grass and enough management to move the way cattle are supposed to move. She had grown up in San Francisco. She had no framework for the number of animals she was looking at. She only knew it was an extraordinary number, and that the land holding them was extraordinary land, and that the structures visible in the valley below, barns, corrals, long low buildings that had to be workers' quarters, and one large house set back from the main operation on a slight rise, were the structures of an operation that had been built over years with considerable resources and considerable intention. She stood the gray mare at the ridgeline for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "Ethan?" "Yes," he said. "How much of this is yours?" It was not entirely a question. She already knew the answer. She was giving him the space to say it. "All of it," he said. "The valley, the grazing rights on the North Range, the summer land where the cabin sits. 11,000 acres in total, give or take what the surveyors argue about." She was silent. "The Brooks family has been in this valley since 1861, he said. "My grandfather brought the first cattle over from Oregon. My father built the main house. I have been running the operation since I was 22. He paused. "I am 34 now." She turned and looked at him. He was watching her face with the careful attention of a man who has been waiting a long time to show someone something true about himself, and is not entirely certain what the showing will cost. "The line cabin," she said. "My grandfather built it as a summer station," he said. "When the main herd moves to the North Range in June, someone stays at the cabin to manage the boundary. It has always been the owner. My grandfather did it. My father did it." He paused. "I do it." "You stayed there yourself," she said. Every summer since I took over," he said. "It is 3 months. The work is real, the fences, the stock management from that end. It is not a comfortable posting. Most of the men would rather stay at the main house and ride out when needed." "But you stay," she said. "I stay because it keeps me honest," he said. 11,000 acres and a main house and a full ranch crew. It is easy to forget what actual work feels like. The cabin reminds me." She looked back at the valley. "When my father wrote to you," she said slowly. "He described you as a burden," Ethan said. His voice was flat and precise. "He described your size, your disposition, your, I am going to say this exactly the way he wrote it, your general failure to be what he required. He offered me money to take you." "I know what he wrote," she said. "I have read his correspondence for years." "Then you know how he sees you?" "Yes," she said. "What I am asking is, when you read that letter, what did you decide?" He was quiet for a moment. "I decided," he said, "that a man who could write that letter about his own daughter was not a man whose assessment of anything could be trusted. And I decided that the woman he was describing, the one who was obstinate and large and refused to conduct herself with appropriate grace, sounded like someone worth knowing." She stared at him. "You agreed to it because of the letter," she said. "Not despite it. Because of it." "Yes," he said. She turned back to the valley. She needed a moment. She was not someone who needed moments often, but she needed one now because what was happening in her chest was large enough that she did not want to try to speak through it until she had it under some management. 11,000 acres, a valley full of cattle, a main house on a rise, and a man who had read her father's cruelest inventory of her failures and decided it sounded like someone worth knowing. "The cracked coffee mug," she said. He looked at her. "In the cabin," she said. "The one you drink from every morning. It has a crack along the side. You have used it every single day for 7 weeks. There are other cups on the shelf." "There are," he said. "Why that one?" Howe was quiet for a moment. "My mother brought it from Ireland," he said. "She carried it the whole way. When I was a boy, she told me that the things worth keeping are not always the things that look worth keeping from the outside." He paused. "It holds coffee the same as any other cup." She breathed. "Ethan," she said. "Yes." "Take me down there." He looked at her. "I want to see it," she said. "All of it. I want to see the barns and the corrals and the workers' quarters and the main house. I want to understand what you have built." She met his eyes. "And then I want to have a very long and honest conversation about what comes next. But I need to see it first." "All right," he said. They rode down from the ridge together side by side, where the trail allowed it, and she was aware of the extraordinary distance between who she had been when she arrived at the Montana property line with a cloth bag and $37, and who she was now riding through a gap in a ridge into a valley that was everything her father had decided she was not worth. She did not feel triumphant. She felt more than anything like herself. The valley received them the way good land receives people who belong on it, without ceremony, without fanfare, with the simple and complete matter-of-factness of a place that has been waiting without knowing it was waiting. The ranch hands they passed stopped their work to look. Some nodded. Some touched their hat brims. None of them stared, which told her something about Ethan's operation, that it was run by people who had learned from their employer that a person deserved to be looked at as a person, and not as a spectacle. Marcus was at the main corral. He saw them coming from a distance, and did not adjust his posture or his expression, which was so entirely consistent with every other thing she knew about Marcus, that she felt a specific warmth for him. "Ma'am," he said when they rode up. "Marcus," she said. He looked at Ethan. Something passed between them, some long-established communication of the kind that exists between men who have worked together for many years, and have stopped needing to explain themselves. "The north herd count came in," Marcus said. "We recovered all 14 head plus 3 more that had drifted before we identified the fence problem. Total loss from the cutting nothing." "Good," Ethan said. "Mercer's lawyer sent a rider this morning," Marcus said. "The competing claim has been formally withdrawn with the territorial office." He paused. "Judge Hartley's clerk confirmed it an hour ago." Mei Lin closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she opened them. "Good," she said, and she meant it so completely that the word felt larger than one syllable had any right to be. Jesse appeared from the direction of the barn with the energy of a young man who has information he has been holding and is relieved to be able to release it. "The letter came too," he said, stopping in front of them. "From San Francisco." The air changed. Ethan looked at Jesse. "What letter?" Jesse looked at Mei Lin. The look on his face told her before he said the words. "From your father, ma'am," Jesse said. "It came to the main house address. Marcus forwarded it when the rider came with the Mercer news." He held out an envelope. She recognized the handwriting immediately. The precise controlled script of Walter H. Carter, who had been conducting business correspondence since before she was born, and had never in her memory written anything that was not primarily about what he needed from the situation. She did not take the envelope immediately. She looked at it for a moment from the back of the gray mare in the yard of a ranch that belonged to the man riding beside her. In a valley she had not known existed 6 hours ago, and she thought about what was in that envelope and what it almost certainly wanted from her. She took it. She did not open it. She put it in her coat pocket. "Thank you, Jesse," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he said, watching her face. "Show me the barns," she said to Ethan. He looked at her, at the envelope-shaped outline in her coat pocket, at her face, at the particular quality of stillness she had learned to wear when she was managing something large, and he turned his horse without asking a single question about the letter. She loved him for that. The thought arrived in her mind with the same flat certainty that accurate statements arrived in Ethan's voice, not decorated, not hedged, not surrounded by qualification. Just true. She noted it the way she noted true things. She did not panic. She did not retreat. She simply registered it and kept riding. They spent 2 hours in the valley. He showed her the barns. 3 of them organized with the same operational logic as the tool shelf in the cabin. Everything in the place that made the most sense for the work being done. He showed her the horse corrals, where 12 working horses and 4 mares with late summer foals moved in the easy rhythms of well-kept animals. He showed her the workers' quarters, long and solid, with actual windows and swept floors and a communal eating space that smelled of coffee and fresh bread. and she noted that the people who lived in them were not living the way people lived in the back rooms of her father's San Francisco household, crowded and provisional and perpetually aware of their expendability. She said this not accusingly, just as an observation. Ethan said, "The work runs better when the people doing it are not exhausted and angry." "Most men who own things do not understand that," she said. "Most men who own things have not done every job on their own operation," he said. "I have. It is clarifying." She looked at him. "You have done every job." "Everyone," he said. "When I took over at 22, I spent the first year doing nothing but working alongside the crew. I needed to know what I was asking people to do before I asked them to do it." She thought about that for a long time. She thought about it while he showed her the main house, which was large and solidly built, and had been furnished by someone with practical taste rather than display taste. Good furniture, chosen for comfort and durability, rather than impression. A kitchen that was designed for actual cooking. A study with a desk that bore the marks of actual use. On the fireplace mantel in the main room, she saw a space, not a gap exactly, but a deliberate clearing the way you clear space for something that belongs somewhere. She looked at it. Ethan followed her eyes. "The mug," she said. "Yes," he said. She looked at the cleared space on the mantel for a long moment. She thought about a cracked coffee cup that held coffee the same as any other cup, and about the things worth keeping that do not always look worth keeping from the outside, and about a woman from Guangdong province who had carried something fragile the whole long way from one life to another, and had told her son that the distance did not diminish the value. She put her hand in her coat pocket and felt the shape of her father's envelope. "Can I sit down somewhere?" she said. "In here," Ethan said, and brought her into the study, where the desk and the window and the working order of everything around her felt less overwhelming than the main room's space. She sat down. She took the envelope out. She opened it. Walter Carter had written 4 pages. She read them once at a moderate pace, the way she read his correspondence, with the part of her mind that had been trained to extract the actual meaning from the formal construction of the sentences, because her father's letters always contained one thing on the surface and a different thing underneath. On the surface, a formal communication informing her of certain business developments in San Francisco. A change in his circumstances. Several of his primary business ventures had encountered difficulties. Associates had withdrawn their investment. His standing in certain circles had been affected. Underneath, he needed something, specifically, and this appeared in the 3rd page, after 2 pages of context, that was designed to soften the request, but did not succeed. He needed her to facilitate an introduction. He had heard through the same business connections he had used to arrange her transfer to Montana that Ethan Brooks was a man of considerable standing in the territory. A man of that standing, if well disposed toward Walter Carter, might be able to provide a letter of introduction to certain business interests in the Pacific Northwest that could offset some of the current difficulties. He did not ask how she was. He did not mention what he had done. He wrote with the same precise, controlled confidence of a man who has always received what he asked for, because he has framed his asking as a matter of course. She read the 4th page. The 4th page informed her that he remained her father, and that his difficulties, while significant, were temporary, and that family was family, and he trusted she would do what was right. She set the letter on the desk. She sat for a moment. Ethan was in the doorway. He had given her the room, and had not left entirely, which was right. "He wants an introduction," she said, "to your business connections in the Pacific Northwest. He has had some difficulties in San Francisco, and he believes your good word to certain parties could help him." Ethan was very still. "He did not ask how you are," he said. "No," she said. "He did not mention how you came to be here." "No." "He did not." Ethan stopped. "No," she said. "He did not. He did not say any of the things a father would say to a daughter he had sent away in a freight wagon with a hired driver and a bill of transfer." She looked at the letter on the desk. "He wrote to me because I am useful to him again. That is the only reason he has ever written to me for anything." The study was quiet. She picked up the letter and folded it carefully along its original creases and put it back in the envelope. "I am not going to ask you to give him anything," she said. I know you are not, Ethan said. What I am going to do is write back, she said. I am going to write back, and I am going to tell him that I am well and that I am settled, and that his request is not something I am able to facilitate. She paused. And I am going to tell him one other thing. What? Ethan said. She looked up at him from the desk. I am going to tell him that I found Montana entirely to my satisfaction, she said. I am not going to explain what that means. He can wonder about it for as long as he likes. Ethan looked at her for a moment. Then he walked to the desk and picked up the cracked coffee mug, which had been sitting on the corner of the desk, she realized not on the mantel here in the room where he actually worked, and he set it in the center of the cleared space on the study's small side table, where it could be seen from the chair she was sitting in. Write your letter, he said. She looked at the mug, at the cleared space, at the deliberateness of the gesture. Ethan, she said. Yes, he said. She looked up at him. I am going to need paper. He opened the desk drawer and set a clean sheet in front of her without a word. She picked up the pen. She wrote, Dear Father, I received your letter. I am well. I am more than well, in fact, which I suspect is not the answer you were expecting. I am not able to facilitate the introduction you have requested. I will not explain my reasons at length, as I do not believe length would add clarity. I have found Montana entirely to my satisfaction. I have found work that suits me, people who see me clearly, and a place where my judgment is trusted and my presence is considered something other than an inconvenience. You sent me here because you had decided I was worth nothing. I want you to know that the decision was not yours to make. It never was. You were simply the last person I waited for permission from, and I am done waiting. I wish you resolution of your difficulties for your own sake, through your own efforts. Mei Lin set the pen down. She folded the letter. She sealed it. She stood up from the desk and looked at Ethan, who had read none of it, but had stayed in the room while she wrote it, present and quiet in the way he was present and quiet for everything that mattered. I need to send this before I change a single word of it, she said. Jesse will ride to town tomorrow, he said. Good. She put the envelope in her coat pocket where her father's letter had been, and she felt the difference between the weight of what she had received and the weight of what she was sending, and the difference was considerable. She looked at the cracked mug on the side table. She looked at the man standing in the doorway of the study he had built in the house he had built in the valley. He had built watching her with eyes that had always seen her clearly from the very first moment on the property road, before she had said a single word, and she understood what the cleared space on the mantel was for. Ethan, she said. Yes, he said. I need to ask you something directly, she said. And I need you to answer me directly, not carefully, not with the version you think I want to hear, directly. He straightened slightly. All right. She held his eyes. What am I to you now? The question sat in the study without apology. He did not look away from her. He did not reach for careful words or softening phrases. He answered her the way he answered everything that was true, plainly, without decoration. In the flat, certain voice of a man who has thought about what he wants to say and is now saying it. You are the reason I came back from the main house in 36 hours instead of 48, he said. You are the reason I cleared a space on the mantel before I knew what for. You are the most complete person I have encountered in 34 years of encountering people, and I knew it within a week of you arriving, and I have been trying to find the right moment to say it since the second week. She breathed. That is a direct answer, she said. You asked for one, he said. I did, she said. She looked at him for a moment longer. My answer to the question you have not asked yet is yes. He went very still. You have not asked it yet, she said. But when you do, my answer is yes. Something crossed his face. The thing she had been watching approach for 7 weeks. The thing that had been building in the spaces between shared silences and repaired fence wire, and the specific way he handed her a canteen after hard work. The thing that a man who does not perform emotion shows instead by being entirely and completely present. And it arrived now quietly without theater, the way everything that was true about Ethan Brooks arrived. I was going to ask at supper, he said. I know, she said. I did not want to wait until supper. He crossed the study in 3 steps, and he took both her hands in his. Not the brief, gentle hold of a man managing a trembling moment, but the full, deliberate hold of a man who has decided what he is holding and intends to keep holding it. And he said, "Mei Lin Carter, will you stay?" "Yes," she said. "I already told you yes." "I wanted to hear it again," he said. She laughed. Not the brief, startled laugh that had escaped her on the porch in the first weeks, but a full, real laugh, the kind that comes from deep enough that it surprises even the person producing it. And Ethan Brooks looked at her laughing in his study with an expression so unguarded and so certain and so entirely without the weight of performance that she thought she might keep that expression in her mind. The way his mother had kept a cracked mug carried carefully the whole long way, because some things are worth keeping, even when they do not look it from the outside. "Yes," she said again, when the laugh had settled. "Ethan, yes." The word spread the way words spread in territory country, not through any single announcement, but through the accumulation of small observations made by people paying attention. Marcus knew first, because Marcus always knew first, and because he had been watching the situation develop with the patience of a man who understands that the most important things rarely announce themselves. He said nothing to anyone, but on this morning after Ethan and Mei Lin rode down from the ridge together, he quietly reassigned 2 of the senior hands to the main house rotation and made sure the main kitchen was stocked for more than one person's needs. Helen Marsh knew second, because Helen Marsh made it her business to know things that mattered, and Ethan Brooks's situation mattered to her in the specific way that a woman who has watched over someone through hard years develops a proprietary interest in whether things eventually go right for them. She rode over on a Thursday morning with a fruitcake wrapped in cloth, and the expression of a woman who has won an argument she was not officially having with anyone. She walked in the front door of the main house. She did not knock because she had never knocked at Ethan's door in 15 years, and found Mei Lin at the kitchen table, working through the household accounts with the focused attention of someone who has discovered a system in significant need of reorganization and has decided to address it completely rather than partially. Helen looked at the spread of papers. She looked at Mei Lin. She set the fruitcake on the table. "How bad is it?" she said. "The accounts." Mei Lin did not look up from the page she was marking. 3 years of inconsistent record-keeping. Nothing dishonest. Just approximate. The kind of approximate that happens when a man is running 11,000 acres by himself, and the books are the last thing he gets to at the end of the day. "He has had bookkeepers," Helen said, pulling out a chair and sitting down without being invited, which Mei Lin had come to understand was simply how Helen operated. "He has had bookkeepers who recorded what he told them to record," Mei Lin said. "That is not the same as someone who reads the whole picture and asks why certain numbers are where they are." She set the pen down and looked up. "He is not losing money. He is leaving a significant amount of it on the table through inefficiency in the supply contracts. 3 of his regular vendors are charging 15 to 20% above what comparable operations in the territory pay." Helen stared at her. "How do you know what comparable operations pay?" "I asked Marcus," Mei Lin said. "Marcus knows everything that happens within 40 miles. I am consistently surprised that Ethan did not think to ask him more often." "Ethan is not a details man," Helen said. "Ethan is an excellent details man for the land and the animals," Mei Lin said. "He is less attentive to the paper side of things because he finds it less interesting. That is fixable." Helen was quiet for a moment. Then she cut 2 slices of fruitcake, pushed one across to Mei Lin, and said, "He is going to ask you to marry him." Mei Lin picked up the cake. "He already asked me." Helen went completely still. "Yesterday," Mei Lin said. "In the study, I said yes." Helen Marsh, who had the reputation in 4 counties of being a woman entirely unmoved by sentiment, sat at the kitchen table of the Brooks main house and pressed her lips together for a full 3 seconds before she trusted herself to speak. "Good," she said. "I thought so," Mei Lin said. "He has needed someone for a long time," Helen said. "Not someone to manage him. He does not need managing. Someone to—" She stopped. "To stand beside him," Mei Lin said. "Yes," Helen said. "Exactly that." They ate fruitcake and talked about the supply contracts, and it was the most satisfying morning Mei Lin had spent in Montana, which was saying something given the competition. Jesse found out by accident, the way young men find out most important things, by being in the wrong place at the right time. He came into the main barn for a piece of tack equipment he needed and heard Ethan talking to Marcus in the adjacent storage room, and he heard Ethan say in the plainest possible voice, "I am going to need to find a ring before the end of the month." And he backed out of the barn without the tack equipment and stood outside for a moment with the particular stunned expression of someone receiving information that reorganizes everything they thought they understood about a situation. Then he put his hat back on and went back to work because he was Jesse, and because he understood instinctively that this was not his information to distribute. He lasted 4 hours before he told the two hands he was closest to. By the end of the week, the entire ranch crew knew, and the particular mood that settled over the operation was the mood of people who work hard in a hard place and are genuinely glad when something good happens to someone they respect. Thomas found out on a Sunday. He arrived on his dun pony, a different horse from the first visit, which told Mei Lin that he had been given more riding responsibility at home, which pleased her, and he came to the main house this time, rather than the line cabin, because Jesse had told him where she was now, and he stood on the front step with the hat in his hands and the expression of a boy who has something to say and is working up to saying it. She opened the door before he knocked. "Thomas," she said. "Ma'am," he said. "I heard you are staying." "I am staying," she said. He nodded slowly, processing this with the serious consideration he brought to everything. "Miss Helen says Mr. Brooks asked you proper." "He did," she said. "And you said yes." "I did." He was quiet for a moment. "My pa asked my ma 3 times before she said yes," he said. "She told me she made him ask 3 times because she wanted to be sure he really meant it and was not just being polite." "That is very wise of your mother," Mei Lin said. "Did you make Mr. Brooks ask more than once?" "No," she said. "I already knew he meant it." Thomas thought about this. "How did you know?" She looked at him, 11 years old, serious-faced, holding his hat in both hands, asking the question with the genuine curiosity of someone who actually wants to understand. "Because he showed me," she said, "before he ever said it. He showed me for 7 weeks before he said a single word about it. By the time he said it, I already had the answer." Thomas absorbed this. "That is different from how my pa did it," he said. "Different people show things differently," she said. "Come inside. There is cornbread." He came inside. He ate 2 portions and talked about his mother's farm and the horse he had been given more responsibility for and the territory school. And she listened and asked questions and refilled his cup. And when he left, he put his hat on and looked back at her from the front step with the expression of a boy who has arrived at a conclusion he is satisfied with. "I am glad you stayed, ma'am," he said. "So am I, Thomas," she said. "Tell your mother I said hello." He rode away. She stood in the doorway for a moment after he was gone and thought about what she had told him. He showed me for 7 weeks before he said a single word, and thought about how entirely true it was, and how remarkable it was to be in a place where the truth was something she wanted to say out loud, rather than something she had learned to keep carefully to herself. The letter she had sent to her father produced a response in 3 weeks. She had expected silence, or the cold formal acknowledgement of a man who has been refused and is repositioning for another approach. What she received was neither. Walter Carter wrote 2 pages, this time not 4. The handwriting was the same precise controlled script, but she noticed reading it that the control was slightly more effortful than usual. The letters a fraction less, even the lines a fraction less straight. The writing of a man under pressure trying to maintain his habitual composure. He did not address her refusal. He did not apologize. What he did, and she read it twice, to be certain she was reading it correctly, was ask a question. One question buried in the second page, after 1.5 pages of context that was designed to approach the question from a direction that felt less like asking. He asked whether she was well. 3 words. After 2 pages of architecture designed to make asking them feel like something other than what it was. Whether she was well. She sat with the letter for a long time. Ethan found her at the kitchen table. An hour later, the letter folded in front of her, her coffee cold beside it. "Your father," he said. "Yes," she said. He sat down across from her. He did not ask to read it. He waited. "He asked if I was well," she said. Ethan was quiet. "That is all," she said. 2 pages to get there, but that is what he actually wanted to know. "What are you going to do?" She looked at the letter. She thought about 23 years. She thought about a bill of transfer and a hired driver and a cloth bag with $37 hidden in the lining and a cracked hand mirror. She thought about a man who had spent 2 decades telling his daughter what she was worth and had arrived apparently at a place where he was asking whether she was well. She thought about what it cost a person to ask that question when they had never asked it before. She was not naive enough to think it was remorse. She did not know what it was. It might be strategy. It might be isolation. It might be the particular recalculation that a man makes when the thing he threw away turns out to have been worth more than he understood. She did not know. What she knew was that she was not the same woman who had arrived at a Montana property line with everything she owned in one hand. "I am going to write back," she said. "I am going to tell him I am well. I am going to tell him I am getting married." She paused. "And I am going to tell him that if he wants to write again, he is welcome to write again. Not to ask for things, just to write." Ethan looked at her steadily. "That is more generous than he deserves," he said. "It is not for him," she said. "It is for me. I do not want to carry the weight of not answering. I am done carrying weight that belongs to other people." He reached across this table and put his hand over hers. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. She wrote the letter that afternoon. It was half a page long. It told him she was well. It told him she was marrying Ethan Brooks of the Brooks Valley Ranch in the Montana Territory. It told him he was welcome to write if he wished, on the understanding that she was no longer available to be managed or positioned or used as an instrument in his business calculations. She sealed it. She did not feel relief exactly. She felt the particular finality of a door that has been closed gently rather than slammed. Still closed, still final, but without the violence of anger. She was finished being angry. She was too busy being alive. The wedding was held on a Saturday in late September, when the summer heat had finally relented and the Montana air had the particular quality of early autumn that makes everything feel both sharp and golden at the same time. Helen Marsh organized it because Helen organized everything that happened within her sphere of interest, whether or not she had been asked to. And Mei Lin discovered that the best response to Helen's organizational energy was to direct it rather than resist it, which was advice she suspected applied to Helen in all contexts. It was not a large ceremony. The ranch crew, Marcus and Jesse and Calloway, Thomas and his mother Ruth, who was a small practical woman with her son's serious face and the particular straight spine of someone who has managed a hard year without letting it curve her. Judge Hartley, who had driven out from town in his Sunday coat with the air of a man who considers attending the wedding of people he has helped protect a professional privilege. Mei Lin wore the better of her 2 dresses, the one she had brought from San Francisco, blue wool, which she had mended twice since arriving, and which fit her, the way good clothing fits a person who has stopped being at war with their own body. She had pinned her hair with 2 bone pins that Helen had pressed into her hand the morning of the wedding with the statement, "They were my mother's, you are keeping them," which was so entirely Helen that Mei Lin simply said thank you and put them in. Ethan wore a clean shirt. It was one of the shirts she had mended in the line cabin in the first weeks sitting by the east window in the last of the summer daylight. She recognized the stitching at the left shoulder because she had done it herself, and the recognition of it. This small piece of the beginning folded into the middle of everything that came after made her throat close briefly before she had it under control. He saw her recognize it. He said nothing. He did not need to. Judge Hartley said the words that needed saying, and Ethan said his in the same plain, certain voice he used for everything true. And she said hers, and meant every syllable with the complete and unperformed conviction of someone who has arrived at a yes after a very long time of not being allowed to say it. Marcus shook Ethan's hand and looked at Mei Lin with the settled warmth of a man who rarely shows warmth and means it entirely when he does. Jesse whooped, which startled 2 of the horses in the near corral, and then had the grace to look briefly embarrassed about it. Thomas stood beside his mother with his hat in his hands, and the expression of a boy watching something he will remember when he is considerably older. And when it was over, he came forward and said with great seriousness, "Congratulations, ma'am, and sir." Ruth pressed Mei Lin's hands briefly and said, "I am glad you stayed." And Mei Lin understood in that moment that Ruth was saying it not only as a neighbor, but as a woman who knew what it meant to keep going when you had no clear reason to expect things to get better, and who was glad to see evidence that they sometimes did. Helen did not say anything immediately. She stood slightly apart for a moment watching, and then she came forward and looked at both of them and said, "Well, good," and turned and went to supervise the food which she had also organized, and which was considerably more extensive than anyone had asked for. That evening, after the crew had gone back to their work, and the guests had ridden home, and the ranch had settled into its ordinary quiet, Mei Lin stood at the study window and looked at the valley in the last of the September light. Ethan came to stand beside her. She felt him there before she heard him, the specific quality of presence that she had learned to recognize in the first week and had been learning more about ever since. On the side table, the cracked coffee mug sat in the cleared space where he had placed it the day before the wedding. It was full. He had poured it that morning and left it there, and she had understood without being told that it was the way he marked something. The way some people light a candle or say a prayer, the way a man who shows things instead of saying them makes a thing permanent. She looked at the mug. She looked at the valley. "Ethan," she said. "Yes," he said. "My father is going to hear about this," she said. "Eventually. Through the business connections, or through the territory news, or through whatever channel those things travel. He is going to find out that the daughter he shipped to Montana on a bill of transfer married the owner of one of the largest ranches in the region." "Yes," Ethan said. "He is. He is going to understand what he gave away," she said. "Not me exactly. He never understood me as something to give away. But the position, the connection, the alliance he could have had if he had seen me as a person worth keeping instead of a burden worth removing." "Yes," Ethan said. She was quiet for a moment. "I find that I do not want him to suffer for it," she said. "I thought I would. I thought that knowing he understood what he had lost would feel like something. But it does not feel like much." "Because you did not come here to prove something to him," Ethan said. "No," she said. "I came here because there was nowhere else to go. And then I stayed because—" She stopped. "Because," he said. She turned from the window and looked at him. The man who had read a cruel letter and decided the woman it described sounded worth knowing. The man who had stepped beside her, not in front of her. The man who had held her trembling hands for one moment and given them back to her, and who had cleared a space on the mantel before he knew for what, and who had answered her question directly when she asked for a direct answer, and whose answer had been the truest thing anyone had ever said to her. "Because this is where I am supposed to be," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the cracked coffee mug from the side table and held it out to her. She took it. She held it in both hands the way she had held her coffee cup every morning at the line cabin table, with the warmth of it coming through to her palms. "Your mother carried this all the way from Ireland," she said. "She did," he said. "Because some things are worth keeping, even when they do not look it from the outside." "Yes," he said. She looked at the mug in her hands, at the crack along the side that had never kept it from holding what it was meant to hold, at the thing that looked broken and was simply marked by the distance it had traveled. She thought about her mother, who had carried a small book of poetry from Guangdong to San Francisco and had given it to her daughter before she died, because beautiful things deserve to continue. She thought about the $37 she had saved in the lining of a cloth bag, coin by coin, against the day she might need to build something with her own hands. She thought about the woman who had fixed cabinet doors without being asked, and ridden fence lines alone, and faced a man on horseback with a splitting maul and a level voice, and rewritten legal correspondence, and caught a wire cutter, and come to stand in a valley she had not known existed, and said yes to a life she had not known was possible. She had carried herself the whole long way, and here she was. She set the mug back in its cleared space on the side table, and she took Ethan's hand, and she looked at the valley in the last of the September light. The valley that was hers now, as completely as it was his. Earned not by the accident of the arrangement her father had made, but by every hour of every day, she had chosen to be exactly who she was, and she understood with the flat and final certainty of a true thing that Walter Carter had made the greatest mistake of his life the morning he counted coins in his palm without looking at her face. He had thrown away the most valuable thing he had, and she had built something extraordinary from everything he had discarded. She was Mei Lin Brooks of the Brooks Valley Ranch in the Montana Territory, and she had not arrived here by accident, and she had not stayed here out of obligation, and she had not become who she was because someone had finally decided she was worth something. She had always been worth something. She had simply found the place where that was no longer